Welcome, Earth citizens. What a privilege for us to be together today as we consider birthing within ourselves and thus within Earth herself, the dawning of a new day for 2019. And as a part of that birthing, Judith is going to share some of the landscape, the ecoscape where we live. It's the land that has selected Judith and me to pay the taxes on it. And she's going to share some now as she stands and sings in that ecoscape.
Okay, here is a song to serenade the beautiful music from the water that flows through this land. The Spirit is in the land. We have come to walk with the Spirit. The Spirit is in the land. We have come to walk with the Spirit in the land. Send us a voice, send us your voice, send us your voice, Wonkan Tonka. The Spirit is in the land. We have come to walk with the Spirit in the land.
So I invite you today in this circle of Earth citizens to consider what you are birthing in your life. What is wanting to come through you today and in the near future? What creation, small or large, is wanting to be expressed through you, your life? Maybe something in your work, maybe a client, something new, a new insight. Maybe something needing to be said to a family member, an intimate connection. Something wanting to be created with you and a loved one. Maybe a poem, or a book even, a dissertation or a thesis, a paper, or maybe a dish you cook well for people you love. Maybe a song that you would sing like Judith just sang to us. Maybe an email that would be sent out of the matrix of love. Or maybe today you're considering birthing a new behavior, or maybe a new state of consciousness, a new awareness, or even more developed, perhaps you have become aware of a virtue that's wanting to come through you. Maybe the translation of a state of consciousness into a trait of character in a world where character seems to have been lost. Let's prime the pump right now by your birthing a comment in our chat, maybe a question. It's your way of participating. I value who you are, where you are. I'm looking around in the participants, and I see people from all over. Let me check here for a moment. I see Amy from Minnesota. I see my good friend Ann Baring from the UK. I'm looking down. I see people from the Hill Country. I see Carol Bennington from Colorado. I see Claudia Moreno. I think Claudia is from south of the border. I see Jennifer Sundin from Massachusetts, and Jillian from Idaho, and Karen Wecker from Virginia. Oh, wow. Leanne from North Carolina. Oh, I see a person from India. I'm just so inspired by your presence. And already 16, 17 of you have been willing to express yourself, giving birth to something even as we speak, as your gift to us. So our aspiration here is for all of us to experience each other. Yeah, we want great ideas. Yes, we want reflection, but first and foremost, in our time together on these first Saturdays, we want to experience each other as citizens of the earth. So we're not just kind of hanging out here as if we're separated. We're all deeply connected. So to begin that participation, I would like for us to look at just a piece of art from Bodie Simpson, who is participating by showing this piece of art. We'll take a quick look at that. What you're seeing now is Bodhi's creation of Quetzalcoatl as she came through in this way to bless our circle in our moments together today. And as we go along each first Saturday, we'll be looking for various ones of you to share what you're creating as we join together to embody what we say, namely that we are different aspects of Earth. Now, I want to shift a little bit and tell you about my friend Larry Winters. Larry and I go back a ways, and he attended our Vision Quest a few years back, and he wrote the book, The Making and Unmaking of a Marine. It's a pivotal book in understanding war and the soul. So you're going to see now a brief conversation that he and I had a while back, a week or so ago back. And I tell you this because he's outside and I'm outside, and you can hear the wind and everything. So, but I think you'll get the feeling of our connection talking about what's being created. And then once we see this, then Larry and I are going to talk live. So here we go to a very brief video.
Well, hello, Larry Winters. As we begin this conversation together, to begin with, tell us where you are.
I'm going to step out of the way and see if you can get a little bit of a view of it.
Ah, yeah.
That's a place, basically, there's a farm behind me, and I'm more or less, my first full exposure to nature was on that farm. I spent an awful lot of time in that stream and in that farmland.
As you're talking about reading about the death of Bearhart's son,
Yes.
It brings to mind that you yourself have been through the experience of war. and you wrote a book called The Making and Unmaking of a Marine. And so in some sense, the birthing that you're doing is revisiting your experience as Bearheart's experience brings that forward.
Absolutely, it does it, but it brings it forward in a way that I haven't been able to embrace or fully understand. I think philosophically, I understand that love and forgiveness are part of the same dynamic, and I've never found the right puzzle opening for me to fit that into in my life, and I think I'm beginning to feel around in the dark and put this piece into place, which has to do with forgiveness, and forgiveness of all that I have been upset and angry about. Otherwise, I stay locked in a dynamic that it's not completely fulfilling.
Yeah, so if I'm hearing you, the beautiful part of this project is that by immersing yourself in the birthing of the audio book of The Wind is Our Mother, you're discovering some healing for yourself through the challenges of having been at war, not only back in Vietnam, but at war with yourself and trying to find an opening of love and forgiveness in your life.
When we talk about love, I think that is giving birth to a child, giving birth to some part of yourself that has been wanting to be birthed, giving birth to relationship. Giving birth is all about love.
Yeah, and you and I are birthing something new in our lives as well. We've agreed that we're going to talk ever so often and just see if we can help heal each other.
Yeah, we spoke yesterday. That was very rewarding. We're creating balance in our relationship, which I felt was exactly what was needed. I've been somewhat of a student of the Earth Tribe, of Judith and others, and that role was comfortable for me, and I'm welcoming and grateful for the new role that we're creating with each other.
Yeah, I think for all of us, and I see 27 of you already have added to the chat, and we're gonna get to that in a few moments. Some of those comments. I can't say how important it is for us to find new levels of intimacy with each other, and that Larry has the project of being the audio voice of the book, The Wind is Our Mother. And that brings to my mind the many aspects of bear hearts in my relationship that I wrote about in Walking with Bears, and how we sought to shift roles in order to be more intimate. And that is what Larry and I are doing, and what all of us are doing here in a way. Once I heard Brian Swim answer this question. Someone said, where do you think the universe is going, since it seems to be expanding in some way? And he thought about it for a moment, and he said, I think the universe is going in the direction that every aspect of the universe, every aspect in its totality. And the way I interpreted that is that we're all going to be more intimate. It may take a while, but even in this online experience, we're really wanting to move in that direction. So, Larry, we look forward to hearing from you again. So I want to shift gears now, and speaking of intimacy, to peek in on a conversation that I had with Carol Flake Chapman, who is one of Earth's poets. So let's shift and pay attention and connect with Carol as we explore this form of birthing.
We're walking up this path now, and as we walk, just welcome to our time together here.
Well, this place has always been very special to me.
Yeah, and we bring our Earth citizens in to the spirit of this labyrinth here where we're sitting. And I was saying earlier, we've had a visitation of a museum of cedar waxwing birds.
Yeah.
They call them museums instead of flocks.
I love that.
Yeah.
Bringing their Christmas blessings
Yes.
just in time.
In some ways, they opened the door to help usher us into a new year and birthing new aspects of ourselves.
Well, for me, it was the cardinals that were on my back deck. I've never had so many. Yesterday, they were just everywhere. And they were like these bright red ornaments in the trees. And it was wonderful.
Yeah. So I want to introduce you, although our Earth citizens have gotten to know you through your poetry over the last period of time, but you are Carol Flake
Chapman,
yeah, Carol Flake Chapman, and let's go back, run the video back just a little bit, and you did your PhD in Tulane,
mm-hmm.
and then you were in New York and Boston. Say a little bit about that.
Yeah, I really didn't know anybody when I went to New York. A starving writer arrives in New York, but I wound up having a wonderful career there and in Boston as well as a journalist. I was at Vanity Fair and the Boston Globe. I did a lot of investigative reporting. So that was kind of my identity at that time.
Yeah. And that was a certain kind of identity.
Right.
That you really, the death of your husband, Gary, just threw that up in the air.
Yeah, he died very suddenly on a wild river in Guatemala, just out of nowhere. And so that threw me down to ground zero,
Mm-hmm.
to essentially looking around and seeing nothing around that was my old life and having to start over again, completely start over again. I couldn't even write. I couldn't write one sentence. I was operating out of a different part of my brain, as Jill Bolt Taylor has written in her book, Stroke of Insight, that you operate out of a different part of your brain. And it's actually a kind of awakening because you see the world in a different way, without barriers, without categories. You're so open. And so in that time, I became open in a way that I'd never been, to nature and to other people in a very deep way. And I realized that nature was actually bending towards me to help me get through this new stage of my life.
Right. That's a very descriptive way to put it. Nature was bending towards you.
Yeah.
As if nature were the natural world outside human control, was reaching into you in some ways.
Yeah, and I began to have inklings of the kind of work that I would be doing, the kind of things that I'd be writing. Some of the first things that started coming to my mind were all the animals that were going extinct. Mm-hmm. And that became my first really major poem, because I was grieving, not just for what I lost, but I was grieving for what the earth is losing.
Yes. And as we're
birthing our way into a new era, it begins with our own storm and angst and upset, but it soon gets to be bigger.
Yeah. I didn't really want to just write about me and my struggles because I felt like I had become part of a greater struggle of survival, and just feeling that I had a responsibility now to the wonderful creatures in nature that really seem to appeal to me in a very personal, deep way, that I owed them something.
Right, and this was particular. There were some particular allies or creatures that were reaching out to you.
Yeah. Well, the first one, oddly enough, was a spider. It's called a riding spider, and I would go past her to my study every morning, and she'd be their webs are characteristic of kind of a zigzag, and it looks like writing. And so I think she was urging me, time to get started writing, you know. And then there was a black deer and a melanistic deer that was born in my backyard, which is more rare than an albino deer. And this creature would come up to me, and I gave it the name Issa, which is Choctaw for deer. And it just felt very special. So these were things along the way that made me feel that I was not alone.
Yeah, there was a kind of intimacy, and it was a black deer.
Yes, very, very rare.
And the message of the black deer often is, I'm with you in the darkness.
Wow, I hadn't thought of it that way, but absolutely. And I just, actually she began to appear before Gary died, and I really think that she was a kind of omen of what was to come. Yeah. She was a blessing.
Yeah. So here's how the birth seems to be taking place. Here is this investigative reporter in a sophisticated New York, Boston, Vanity Fair, Boston Globe culture, and now you're in this part of the world, and the foundations are being, or as Paul Tillich put it, they're being shattered. And in the midst of all of this, these creatures start reaching out to you. It's another part of the brain.
And it was very hard for me to talk about this, much less to write about it. But then I thought, you know, this is, I feel that I'm fortunate in some odd way to now have this way of seeing the world, and I need to write about it, about what I'm seeing, and try to. I wanted to re-enchant the world for people.
It's a wonderful way to put it, and out of that part of your beginning, your birthing, came the book, Written on Water.
Written in water. And,
in water, not on water.
And it was an accounting of my very much improvised pilgrimage from darkness into light over a year. And so that really helped me put some of the pieces together of this puzzle of my life.
Right. And as we're connecting with Earth citizens around the world right now, I think it's important because the world itself, as you and I have talked, is kind of in another dark ages.
Yeah, I feel a great sense of urgency. I mean, a tremendous sense of urgency, actually. It's almost as though the earth is calling to many, many of us to respond and to hear her and see her and do what we can to stop this madness that we're going on this path towards destruction.
Yeah, and a part of that is one way she expressed herself was through the book that you wrote. And now you're doing another kind of writing.
Yeah, it is like giving birth. A book in particular is like giving birth because of the gestation period, the long gestation period. But poems are something different. I feel as though at this point they come through me. They are part of me and part of what I've learned about writing, but I also feel like I'm much more open to a certain kind of inspiration of the earth kind of speaking through me. I know that sounds pretentious in some ways, but I truly feel that the earth wants us to speak for her.
Yeah. As her.
As her, in her voice sometimes.
Yes.
In her voice sometimes.
Yeah. And in her deeper voice.
Yes. It's kind of hard for us sometimes to reveal how deeply we feel about these things to other people who don't feel that particular way. But I feel like, what the heck, what do we have to lose? Because, time's short.
Yeah, and I'm guessing that you've been through some kind of journey where you were in a certain intellectual, academic, kind of social milieu, and then you suddenly find yourself being spoken to by birds and spiders and so on. That must have been some kind of struggle.
Well, yeah, because you realize that you may not get the recognition or acknowledgement from that particular world, but at this point, that really doesn't matter.
Yeah,
it doesn't matter. I feel like I'm actually reaching people in a much deeper way now than I ever did as a journalist.
Yes, you have. Through the poetry that you're putting out on Facebook and other social media, you're having quite a response.
Yeah, and people are saying, well, you're able to put into words what I've been feeling, but couldn't put into words. So I feel like that's the biggest compliment I could get.
Right. And some of these people who've been reading your poetry have joined our circle today as Earth citizens. So let's pause here a moment and see if you have a poem that you'd like to offer as a part of our birthing into larger dimensions of ourselves.
I'd like to read this one called Calling for a New Kind of Song, because it goes from maybe the conventional way we used to think about nature to the more immediate sense of crisis right now. There was a time that nature touched us in the way of a teacher or a lover, and poets could sing blithely of her wonders. When Shelley wandered lonely as a cloud, Keats heard the song of the nightingale, and Wordsworth saw intimations of immortality. But it was Yeats who looked beyond the swans to the widening gyre and told us of rough beasts approaching and that the center could not hold. So what are we to do when we behold a tree that beckons us to come close and then whispers in our ears, please help me? We want to just let go of everything so we can hold the wounded bird and hear a new kind of song. We want to step in a river that is dying and hear the murmurs from the current that says we can't step twice in her waters. So we enter into a new kind of relationship with the once wild world that needs us as much as we have always needed her. So we listen, we listen, we listen, and in the silence, we forge a bond as we vow to never let go, never let go.
Oh, good. Yeah. So I can feel a kind of a primal urgency coming through as you read that.
Yeah, it's like it's not enough to just love nature and appreciate her. It's because she needs us at this point. Yeah. It's a calling, I would say.
Yeah, she needs us. Each one of us, as we get birthed into this year, 2019, she needs us to be her voice. That's what I was, as you were reading, I'm thinking, well, this is not Carol speaking on behalf of Earth. This is Carol speaking as an aspect of Earth, saying what you had to say. Let's go on and hear another one.
Okay. Now this one is about sometimes feeling alone in our feelings of isolation that and feeling of urgency that no one quite understands.
Right.
So this is called Where Do I Belong? Where do I belong? Is it in this neighborhood of old Bernie signs where I know the names of all the dogs? Is it in this city that proclaims, keep Austin weird, but keeps me stuck in traffic fuming? Is it in this state of big sky and big talk that has gone crazy with guns? Is it in Italy where I dream of living someday when my ship comes in? Is it in my study surrounded by books where I commune with writers that I love? Is it in my dear plundered garden where the seeds I planted are growing? I look at the lonely high-rises downtown, and then I think of friends who live there. A light or two shines in the dark tower. I thought I was alone, but I'm not. I look out at the landscape, then there is a bird, a squirrel, a butterfly. Someone is coming down the path. I thought I was alone, but I'm not. I look up the stars, so distant, and then I imagine a ladder like Jacob's that I can ascend, or maybe watch the descent by whatever passes for an angel these days. I hear, you are welcome here. I thought I was alone, but I'm not, caught between a dying world and one yet to be born. I am Spider-Woman, sending out strands of connection in every direction. Here at the hub of the web, I thought I was alone, but I'm not. I touch strands reaching across rivers, across valleys, across mountains, connecting us all and calling us to a home that we have yet to build.
Yeah. So let me take that in for a moment. Because I think in our inner council of selves, there's some prominent voices there. And one of them that you're really picking up on that I'm sure our Earth citizens can connect with is this feeling of not belonging. And yet, another aspect that connects with the spider and with the different creatures that are reaching out to you.
It's when we realize we are not alone, not just in terms of people not understanding, but we realize that we are really part of this earth in a very deep and profound way. We're all connected.
Yeah, the illusion is that we are alone.
That is the illusion.
And then as we begin to transcend that, we still have this task of taking care of the part of us that thinks she is alone.
Yeah, we have to deal with our everyday selves, and find ways of happiness and comfort. But when I said never let go, that's what I mean. It's just, even as we live our ordinary lives, to never let go of this hope of doing what we can to stop the dying of the earth.
Yeah. So the never let go is never let go of this deep reality of the connectedness.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's really important. Before we move on to another poem, where are you experiencing community these days, besides with the creatures?
Well, it's realizing that there really are circles of people that feel the same way I do, and that are very much like the Earth Tribe and the wisdom community around the world. That's the most extraordinary thing, is seeing the young people who are awakened, very much awakened, and are really at the vanguard. Sometimes it might be time for us to pass the torch, I'm thinking.
Yeah. Now, in some ways, your poetry is giving birth to the passing of that torch.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm hoping that more young people will take up the torch. Mm-hmm. It's really up to them. It's not up to us at this point.
Yes.
Not up to us.
Right. Later on in our time together in Earth Citizens, we'll have a rap from one of our younger people.
Yes, I love that.
Yeah. So let's hear another one.
Okay. Now this is a more optimistic view of things, called A Time for New Beginnings. Let go of what's done, of what's gone, of what is finally over, though the traces linger to remind you of what you've lost. These are not ghosts, but leaves turn brown and boats over the horizon. They may yet return as dogwoods in spring, as white sails coming to harbor. Let go of the water rushing through your hands, things that you can't hold. Let go of time that tells you to hold on, that says to wait, instead of telling you to seize this moment that won't come again, and then release it, so you can seize the next with open arms. How could you know how precious it was until you let it go? The light is returning, as it always has, as it always will, telling you everything ends, and yet there is no end to chances to start again. And so go ahead and follow the bluebird that once led you astray, and yet now seems ready for you to dream a different dream, ready for you to make the leap you couldn't make last year. How can you know how much you've grown until you jump?
Fantastic, fantastic. That last phrase, I think, is one for us to embrace today in our citizens circle. Let's hear that again.
Okay.
The last part there.
Okay. How can you know how much you've grown until you jump?
Yeah, I'm thinking about when we go to Teotihuacan.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking about when we climb the pyramid of Quetzalcoatl. So, what do you remember of that?
Well, that the initiates who came to the top were told by their elders that in order to go on to the next stage, they had to jump.
Yeah.
And it was like jumping into nothingness, not knowing there was, in fact, water waiting for them to fall into and safely arrive.
Right. So the initiation was just what your poem was saying, this jumping into the abyss, into the mystery.
Into the mystery, into the future. It is a mystery.
And that's really what we're doing in this call right now, is trying to see if we can jump into who we can be, who we are, and how we're connected. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, thank you. I've enjoyed it very much.
Yes, thank you so much, Carol. And Carol, I'm going to bring you in since you're live here with us today, and I'm going to put you on the spot. We have a wonderful question on the public chat here from Lou Marie Maldonado. And the question is, how do you forgive when you have been so angry for so long? And from the viewpoint of the poet, give us just a couple of lines or so, some headlines. You had a lot you could be angry about, as you mentioned in our dialogue. So how do you get over that?
Well, I think about the old notion of the artist as the wound and the bow. You take the wound, the deep wound, and you transform it into an arrow, which is your art, that you then shoot into the world. From the wound to the world. It's transformation. It's some deep, deep alchemy, transformation. And unless you can express that deep wound, it will just keep festering. And anger is just consuming. It's all consuming.
Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you for being with us. And we look forward to your poetry many Saturdays in the future. I want to comment a little further on what Carol said, and also Lou Marie's question. In my experience, almost all anger is that part inside of us, that sub-self, that's attempting to take care of us by being a warrior. And the anger is covering up a deep vulnerability. And as Carol mentioned, for me at least, the deep vulnerability is what draws the bow back. It draws the bow back further and further. And in some ways, there's anger mixed in it. But some of the vulnerability that I've been going through, Judith and I, over the last few years, has really helped draw the bow back. But in order to keep drawing it back, I have to take care and heal that vulnerability to get underneath the anger to the vulnerability. So we send that to all of us today because all of us have varying degrees of vulnerability that anger is shielding us from. The shamanic trick is not to get caught in the anger because it keeps you from going into the vulnerability and healing it. So I want to see now with the chat, we had on the chat earlier, Jen Sundin from Massachusetts. And let's see if we can bring from the larger group to represent you, Jen Sundin. Let's see, if, Dan, if you can bring her in. Hello, Jen.
Hello. I didn't know I was going to be live, but that's all right. Hi.
Well, you know.
Put on lipstick.
Yeah, well, let's see. What I'd like for you to do is just tell us a little bit about the birthing of the mother through your being a mother. Let's not ignore that the divine feminine expresses herself perhaps most adroitly through the biologically feminine and through the birthing of children. So if you just speak to that a bit spontaneously.
Absolutely. Well, in our last conversation I had with you, Will, right before we were hanging up, I said something about how I absolutely love this time of year because it coincides with the idea of giving birth. I love to give birth. Physically, I mean, it was a challenge for me with my 3 daughters. Not so easy. Some have these delightful births that, you know, the babies slip out on the Mass Pike on the way to the hospital.
Uh-huh.
And, you know, mine have, the birth of my 3 daughters, I struggled and with all 3. And I feel like there is something, oftentimes there's something about the struggle and birth that so oftentimes they do go together. And I'm not entirely sure why, but it's almost like the shedding of the skin or the letting go of one way of being in the world in order to enter into this new place of possibility. And it's in that moment of shedding and becoming anew that it's like that moment is so full of powerful energy of possibility. And I don't know, I love that energy. I love that moment.
Well, I appreciate that, and I didn't want us to complete today without honoring and giving complete respect to all the mothers who biologically give birth. In fact, our daughter, Chris, when she gave birth to my grandson, Will Turner, we'll hear from later, Chris has got a great sense of humor, and she said, I said, what was it like, Chris? And she said, well, I mean, sort of like passing a basketball. And so, getting back to Lou Marie's question about anger, there's a certain amount of suffering and frustration and anger that goes along with giving birth, as well as vulnerability. So thank you so much, Jen, for coming in, and also coming in spontaneously without knowing you were coming in.
Absolutely. My pleasure. Thank you.
Okay, great. Okay, I want to pause now and recognize all the people who are live streaming on Facebook. We always have sometimes several thousand people live streaming, and we haven't got a technology yet where we can bring them in live the way we just did Jen. But I do want to acknowledge that Marie Williams, Bearheart Williams' daughter, is with us live streaming today. And though I've never met you, Marie, I just want to acknowledge that your father and I spoke of his experience as a father many, many times. And there was a certain tenderness that was not immediately evident sometimes in us men as he gave birth to the love that he had for all his children and his grandchildren. And also I'd say to Lou Marie Maldonado, one of the ways Bearheart and I talked about getting over anger through the loss of his son, your brother, in a war effort, was to purify ourselves, to loosen ourselves from the deep hold that our grief and upset has on us. And there's a great modeling that we have that I describe in the book that I have about Bearheart, and that he describes himself in his wonderful book, The Wind is My Mother. So thank you so much for being with us, and thank you to all of the people live streaming on Facebook today. It's such a pleasure for us to connect with each other. And I know the internet is not the most energetic form of being with each other, but it is a way for us to be with each other. And I'm thankful for it so much. So as we come to our time today of closure, as we lean into 2019, I want to bring, at the beginning we had Judith singing from this sacred landscape that we call home. I'm going to ask my nieto, Will Blue Wind Turner, to bring us to a moment of closing the circle, and then I'll make a few comments at the end.
Greetings, Earth citizens. My name is Will Turner, and today I just want to talk a little bit about the idea of birth and rebirth into a new era, and especially since we're turning the clock to 2019. And I'd like to welcome you to a land which has a great importance in my life. I was born 24 and a half years ago, and a few months after, I suppose, I don't really remember, I was too young, and these waters, when they were running, it's ice cold. I was actually baptized here, and I grew up in this land and ran around the canyon, and amongst all the creatures, the snakes and the deer, they all kind of ran wild, and I guess you could say in this land it allowed me to run wild. And so from a practical standpoint, this land really resembles a symbol of my birth. And every year that I come around the corner to a new year, 2019 this time, I always like to take a walk. And it's been a while since the timing has been a new year and the water has been flowing, because the water here only flows if we get a good rain. So obviously we had a good rain a couple nights ago here in Wimberley. And after a long year, it's really important, I think, to have a place that you can go to where you can reflect. And if you want to initiate a rebirth, I think that water, if you just listen to the sound, water has a lot to do with birth. And for me, this place is a sanctuary for me to come and reestablish where I am in the world and step into the new year. Another interesting thing about this place is, if you notice, this is sort of the foothills leading into the wild. And a couple years ago, I had an experience just down there where the water flows, where it was late at night, and I was sitting out on the porch just looking at the stars, thinking about life. I must have been a freshman or sophomore in college, so maybe I was musing about a lost love of mine, or maybe I was thinking about an exam that I had to take. Either way, I was out here just relaxing in between semesters, in between school, late at night, and you could barely hear the soft sound of cars off in the distance, and it was very quiet. And I was sort of skipping stones and throwing them down in the canyon, and all of a sudden I hear this sound that just completely shook me to the core. And the sound was that of a fully grown cougar taking its kill. So it sort of sounded like something very wild and something that you feel in your bones. And so anyways, I immediately stood up and was just kind of freaking out because it was sounded like it was within 20 feet. And of course in the canyon sound echoes. And I kind of took out my cell phone just like this and turned on the flashlight, and I kept peering around and looking down in the canyon, and I couldn't see anything. So I kind of made what I like to call like a nature call of an owl, and I was waiting for a response, and two blue eyes shot up and looked at me, and then they went back down and then disappeared. And so I made another sound, and the two eyes looked back up, two blue eyes. And so I was like, okay, well, I could see the silhouette of the cougar and whatever it had gotten. And then I made a third sound, and there was no eyes anymore, so I ran inside because I was really scared. But the reason I'm telling you that story is because on one hand, this place is special to me because it was where I was baptized, and it's peaceful, and the water reminds me of that energy. But on another deeper level, I had that connection to what I would call pure wild, the pure sound of a cougar. And it's moments like that which initiate rebirth. And what I like to say, the rebirth and the manifestation of my connection and my reconnection to nature. Where as a child I ran along these canyons and I would name the rocks and hang out here and have all sorts of adventures with my imagination. And then as I got older and logic and the world kind of sent that imagination askew a little bit, I lost that connection, which we all inevitably do. And ever since that moment a few years ago with that cougar, I would say I've been forming a new bond with my inner wild and a birth to my inner wild. And so I think for me, this whole situation of rebirth is all about the manifestation of connecting to nature again. And so as we step into 2019, I'd like you all to just kind of take a moment and take a breath and feel that inner wild that we all have. Oh.
I want to, again, thank you for being with us today. And also, in a few moments, I'm going to sing a song. Just listening to Will reminds me of the theme on February the 2nd, our next call, which is millennials and elders, what we can create together on behalf of Earth. Millennials and elders. So we're going to have some of both, but quite a few people, younger people, who will be expressing themselves through their art and other ways as we seek to build bridges between the generations. So Mari Williams, Bearhart's daughter, for you, for all of us, I'm going to sing a song of birthing that Bearhart taught me as we close. Yana ho, yana henayo, 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 ho we, hey na, hey ne yo we. See you next time, Earth citizens.